my name is Libby Schaefer, and I'm an environmental sciences master's student at DePaul University. I received my bachelor's of arts in sociology and culture anthropology from the University of Puget Sound in 2013. I'm a longtime plant lover. I'm new to the world of bees, and I only say that because I am going to share information about the bees. I'm starting to learn a lot more and definitely being enthralled to become more of a bee person, but I won't be able to answer every question about bees, but I'm happy to answer as much as I can and share some resources with you. I created the Evanston Host Plant Initiative in partnership with Natural Habitat Evanston. Leslie Shad and Allison Sloan are here from. Big shout out to them. They've been extremely supportive and helpful in launching this and getting this going, and they're going to extend it to conserve other pollinators in the future, which is amazing. This is also my thesis project. I don't know if I mentioned that a second ago. So there's a research component involved in it as well. So I'll start by sharing information about bumblebees and why they're so important for people and the environment. So there's 20,000 bee species in the world. 4,000 native bees are native to North America, including 50 bumblebees that are native to North America. 1 out of 3 bites of food is attributed to bees' pollination services, and the crops that they pollinate actually make up a $3 billion industry. Many plants rely on bumblebees for reproduction and release pollen to only the specific vibrations of buzz pollination. So tomatoes are actually one of these plants that rely just on buzz pollination. So if bumblebees were to go extinct, it would detriment flowers, crops, and ecosystems. The Rusty Patched Bumble Bee is the star of this project because it's an endangered species. Its population has declined over 87% in the last 20 years, and this is primarily due to pathogen spillover, habitat loss, and the loss of flowering resources, pesticide use, and climate change. And I highlighted the loss of habitat and flowering resources and pesticide use because those are the 2 issues that we're targeting with this project. So here's this awesome map from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services of the Rusty Patched Bumblebee's historical and current range. So historically, its range was in the Midwestern and Eastern United States and Canada, including 28 states and 2 provinces, but recently it's only been present in 0.1% of its historical range and reported in 13 states, including the Chicago region. So you can actually see in this light gray, its historical range, and then the red is where they estimate that there's high potential zones for it to exist. So really in this area, it's significant. The yellow and light blue are the low potential zones, but the light blue has greater uncertainty because it's based on older data. And this is an interactive map too that you can find on FWS's website. So the bumblebees can be identified by their color patterns. For this project, you don't actually need to know bee identification. I'll get into this more, but I'm asking people to take photos of just any bees, and then we'll have an entomologist ID the bees. But a lot of people have been interested, so I just wanted to share some things that I learned about the bee identification. So the Rusty Patched Bumblebee has this distinct rust color and thumbtack black mark on the back of its thorax. The queen looks a little bit different. It has this circular dot on its thorax and it doesn't have the patch. The queen can only be seen when it emerges from overwintering in the ground in early March, and then when it's looking for a wintering spot in the late fall or early fall, like October. Otherwise, it's protecting the nest. And the Rusty Patched Bumblebee does have some lookalikes. One of them is the brown-belted bee. So you can see that it has this circular dot, and instead of having the space in between, you see how with the Rusty Patched Bumblebee it has the black and then the yellow and then the rust color. This just has the black and then the rust color immediately. So bees are kind of tricky to identify, especially because when you're trying to take pictures, they tend to be flying all around. But those are some tips. You can also tell if it's a bumblebee if it's big and fuzzy. So the Rusty Patched Bumblebee relies on a suite of organically grown flowering host plants for its pollen and nectar needs. So they need flowers that bloom throughout the whole season to provide it resources. So that's from early March all the way through October. And at least 38 host plants are native to Illinois, and many of them are beneficial for other pollinators. The plants need to be grown within the minimum jumping distance of the bee, which is about 0.6 miles, but the greater density and proximity of the plants, the better. We're recommending that folks plant at least 3 to 5 in their yards. That's about what the Field Museum's Monarch Butterfly Program is recommending for folks to plant like 3 to 5 milkweeds in the yards too. So we're following those suggestions. And I just learned that the Rusty Patched Bumble Bee has a short tongue, which means that it has more competition for the resources from the host plants, because the long tongue insects can access the tubular flowers, whereas the short tongue insects only have access to certain flowers. So you can see, I pulled some pictures from the flyer that we created of a couple of the species. A lot of these are really common around Evanston and in yards. So the wild geranium, Virginia waterleaf, coneflower, bee balm, goldenrod, and aster are some of them. Let me see if I can also show you this U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Here, let me see if this works. So they have this amazing Midwest plant guide that I've been following, and it breaks it down into early, mid, and late blooming periods in the forbs and the wild, and trees and shrubs. So some of these are willow trees, serviceberries, gooseberries, coneflowers, as I mentioned, shooting stars, bluebells. There's a ton. I also dropped this link in the chat so you can go through and see what you have and what you might want to grow or maybe have seen around town. So urban green spaces are known to be significant for pollinator conservation. As I mentioned, organically growing the host plants can help conserve pollinators. And if you think of the city, there's a mosaic of green patches that can actually be planted in to create this network of habitat patches for bees and other pollinators to be able to jump between and access resources. So this can be in yards, parks, balconies, roofs, community gardens, you name it. The bees can go pretty high off the ground as well. And the more, the better. We ask that people organically grow this, so without neonicotinoids, because the toxins can actually be detrimental for the bees. And the greatest planting potential the Field Museum noted was at residential yards, which collectively make up a significant amount of space. So this is where you come in. We're asking folks to be a host and take and upload photos to Inaturalist. I'll show you more about the Inaturalist project, but there are 3 different activities, and it's purposely very flexible so that you can plug in whichever way is interesting and exciting to you. So you can either take and upload photos of existing host plants that maybe you have at your yard or see around town. Any new host plants that you grow, if you could take a picture and upload it to Inaturalist, and any bees that you see. So this will help us assess the habitat that already exists and get a better picture of what habitat is there to help with expanding habitat. As I mentioned, there will be an entomologist we're partnering with who's going to look through all the bee photos on Inaturalist and help us identify if the Rusty Patched Bumble Bee happens to come around. If you're not yet, you can also follow us at Evanston Host Plants on Facebook and Instagram, and sign up at evanstonhostplants.org. So the link is in the chat for that too. And again, I'll dive more into Inaturalist, but I just want to show you how we're using this for the research. So as of now, there are 529 observations of host plants in Evanston on Inaturalist. And this is since 2008 when the app launched. I am only able to use accurate coordinates for the research. So there are ways to either share your coordinates publicly or make them private or obscured, but trust this project with your coordinates so that your data is still contributing. And I'll walk you through that too. But there are a lot of people who are contributing to this research without even knowing it. As you can see, there's 109 people that have posted pictures of host plants. And then on the left, you can see an example of a map that I made of the early blooming host plants. And I'm looking at where the greatest densities of host plants are, if they're in proximity to one another within the 0.6 mile jumping distance of the bee, and where there are gaps. And so we recognize that the Inaturalist data is kind of limited because people may not know about the app. It's really dependent on who uses it and where they use it. So that's where you come in, is helping us get a more accurate account of the host plants in Evanston, and then also helping us to expand the habitat for the bee. We think that this can be significant for helping conserve the Rusty Patched Bumble Bee as well as other pollinators. If you've again joined on your phone but not yet on the website, then you can change your membership here. And then here's where my screenshots come in. First, when you open Inaturalist and sign in, I just went to more to make sure that I was a part of the host plants for the Rusty Patched Bumble Bee project. You don't need to do that every time. I just wanted to show you quickly how to do that. And then down in the center at the bottom, you'll see a camera icon and it will say observe. So you'll click that and I'll show you where that will take you to step 2. So again, some folks are outside. I saw my mom in her backyard, so she could do the camera, but if you're inside, you can do camera roll, or you can just do this later when you're around a plant. So you'll click camera to take a photo, or camera roll to upload an old photo. And you can add the photo by, if it doesn't automatic, like if you haven't taken the photo, if you're uploading the photo, you can add it by clicking this plus button. And then you can add, I think, up to 4 photos. And then once you click here, it will show you the same thing that we saw on the website, where it says, we think it's this, but it might be this. And that's where you can either type in what you think it is or guess, or just leave it blank. Here's where it will say notes. I just typed in 2. I was at the Indiana Dunes recently on a field trip, and we saw these lupins, and there were 2 in the area. So I typed in 2 in that area, and then it automatically uploaded the time and the location. If you click geoprivacy, this is again where you can choose to have your coordinates private or obscured. So that means that the public wouldn't be able to see where you observed it. But if you have trusted me with your coordinates, just using it for the research, then you'd still be able to contribute to the project. And again, for captive or cultivated, I know that sometimes I forget to do this part, honestly, but if you remember and say yes if it's grown in a garden or lawn or by somebody, not wild in the forest. So I said no for this because this one was wild. And you don't need to click anything for projects, because it will automatically get added if you're joined for this project.